Okay.
Yeah.
We're thinking about doing a couple of.
Oh, we need pens out there. Good morning.
Simple base model. Thing.
You want to say we're yesterday?
Did you?
You must have been running for lunch.
So people can.
Yeah, that sounds right. Oh, you know what I was running for was bandages.
Oh, you were?
Yeah,
Very nice stuff there.
I sent myself to the ER last week. Recycling. Yeah. And I
30 years.
busted it open and needed like the right kind of bandage.
Renovation.
Yeah, I definitely was.
Parker.
Hey, how'd you do?
Good to see you.
Likewise. Where did you go to bowling space?
Oh,
You just pulled a 208.
I saw.
Yeah, I saw at the hospital yesterday.
Yeah, Bill fell over.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
But that was pretty impressive.
Yeah, he was super strong.
Not till January, yeah.
Were you there?
I know, I seen him at the hospital, I was getting lunch, and, he just came in.
He's sworn in. I don't.
Yeah,
think
that's
he would
great.
Do that. I think he's.
They have a turkey there. A couple of them just
Project.
Oh, that's awesome. I've only had one turkey position.
Last week, we went last Wednesday, we both worked late. Wednesday night, both too.
I read that.
It was her first trip.
That's good, right?
She was pretty excited
I
about it.
love that bowling alley. It's like the most classic bowling alley ever in so many ways. I just love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why?
And waited.
I bought it from- it's a lot of fun.
Did you get one?
It's very local spot.
Just, I can't, I just wanted to check.
A lot more
You just see
tourists than I see them.
It's
Very
No, no, I think they do things that when you turn out, they did.
Yeah, it's kind of like more call like a.
Right, This family,
Yeah. Pretty something.
who's not gonna be there, so Shannon got it.
Full hall and.
Mark down the hall, Mark Gibson, the special district, so I guess I didn't show up as the expert that's talked about in this letter. Can you give Doug a call? Because he has no idea. He thinks this is all rolling forward. I have not been involved in. That's why I have no idea what the background is.
Okay.
We live in St. Helens.
I didn't know if it was more like housing focused.
No,
No,
it's the fact.
So we're here today.
that-
It depends on the week and what's going on. If we're gonna be out here, we'll just stay Monday through Friday.
This weird process.
Yeah, I guess we're just.
Then we got.
Is that
You can hear.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we need to speak.
And I had one previously where we were only gonna for a few years ago, and then talking to the county recently about their white shortage. So it's just like, hey, everybody, let's get together.
Right, and going on, and for Sarah, can you hear us? And.
Okay, especially where was I?
Their wastewater is.
Right? And
So this whole thing we've been talking about for 3 years was regional water plan?
Yes.
Happening on the backside somehow.
yeah, because, yeah,
Regional water sanitary district.
well, and that's what this conversation was just like, how do we not end up here every week?
I had an in-depth conversation with Mark Newsom about it yesterday. About that, like, you know, he knows the.
TV microphone.
guy too, so.
Okay, perfect, yeah.
Well, I should. Or, yeah. I will do that.
What's coming to them, find it out. There's no big things that were done by Debbie in our office.
Yeah, because it was from her
The TV.
that went like 3 people.
Where did I
and
set
then
that?
I copied her. Oh, what?
Yeah, give Doug a call and just,
Okay.
okay, I'm talking to people and nobody's gotten this in.
Right, okay.
So we need to, yeah. Oh, thank you for being supportive of that. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Oh, but good. We always everything. I know they are in here. I love that. So like I said, Doug's gotten something for a few things that I think he's gonna want to finish. So I don't think he'll step aside in my call, but I don't remember.
Yeah, I just didn't know what the protocol was.
No, protocol is he's Doug's the commissioner. Separate, so.
So you're trying to start January.
Yeah, yeah, you get sworn in the first business day of January. Okay, I'm gonna set from gate to get on your airplane.
Yay.
But the egg one? Yeah. And you said they can sell these? Yeah.
1 year
That's
down.
pretty impressive.
1 year down.
We do this play by
Yeah,
play.
that might be able to.
She's got a flight from Charlotte to Chicago.
100%.
Opportunity along the way for
That's a very nice.
delays and.
Yeah, so I mean, for.
So that gives you 3 hours later, there's the short way.
Yes.
Yeah,
It's rush hour.
that definitely said something. There's the potential for this.
Yeah, that's the.
It's the, it's called insurance, and yes, necessarily they. And. So many people on this, all this disturbing thing.
So will you let me know if there's people that raise their hand online?
Absolutely.
Well,
And. So far, we've only got Brett and Sarah. You guys have a formal, like, comment, public?
we do.
Okay.
Yeah. Looks like there's one at the beginning and the end.
Yeah. Just gonna steal Sarah's agenda while she's not here. Oh. Thank you, Parker.
You there?
This is Megan today.
Oh.
I know.
Where am I?
I think you need to make those notes. I did.
Put my name on it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's next to.
Good thinking, I wrote my name on the back. Here, I'll do it.
So I think we should get down to. Hey, good morning, everybody. I'll call the May, Housing Commission meeting to order. I'm Chris Lockenmeyer and I'm filling in for Ed and Carrie, who are unavailable today. So we will get started by introducing ourselves. Like I said, my name is Chris and I'm a large employer representative. So then we'll go to my right.
I am Kristen. I am what am I? At-large representative based in Rockland.
Mark, I'm a Tillamook County rep based in Manzanita.
Greg, builder, developer, on the development committee.
Dave Madison, city planner for the Bay City.
I introduce myself. Let's Yates, senior planner, Tillamook County.
Parker Sammons, I am the Tillamook County Housing Coordinator.
Dave Bennett, South County Representative in Nesquik.
Michelle Yank, large employer representative.
Aaron Starr, Tillamook County Commissioner.
Thanks. How about people online? You know, we have a commissioner online, I think, maybe not. No? So if you're a guest and you'd like to introduce yourself, go right ahead.
Sure. Hi, I'm Sarah Lou Heath. I work with the Columbia Pacific Economic Development District.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Brett Estes. I'm the North Coast Regional Rep for the Department of Land, Conservation and Development.
Good morning, Brett.
Brett.
And good morning. My name is Sean Edging. I'm a senior housing planner at the Department of Land, Conservation and Development. Thank you for inviting me.
Yep, thanks for joining us. And in the room, we have two guests.
Hi, Rich Brackey, Bigger India.
Welcome. So we always start our meetings with a mission minute, which is good news about housing, if anybody has anything to share.
I do. I was recently informed that there is a new nonprofit developer who just got their nonprofit status, and they are very interested in working in South County.
Oh, yay.
So no specific projects or specific news. I just wanted to let you know that we have another nonprofit developer in the area.
Right on. So a couple of people came in, we'll let them introduce themselves, and then we're doing a mission minute. Sarah?
Perfect. I'm Sarah Dental and I am a representative from the real estate community and a member of the group.
Happy to have you.
Thank you. I'm Amy Carpenter, representative for the city of Tillamook.
Nice. Dave, did you have something?
I just wanted to let everyone know that the planning commission Bay City just approved a 29 unit workforce housing development in Bay City.
Exciting.
That's amazing. Is that one separate from any of the ones that have come before?
It was Tyler Brogdon.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, duplexes.
Duplexes, fourplexes,
Yeah.
triplexes. Yep.
it's exciting.
That is very
It was
exciting.
the backside of the hill, I guess.
And that's the mixed income one. So that'll be the first
Right.
mixed income rent controlled apartments in the area.
Great news.
Yeah.
So now we have a little bit of time for public comment, if anybody has anything to share at the beginning of our meeting. If not, we will move right into DLCD updates. Brad, are you gonna give us an update?
I believe it is
Actually, what I'll
Sean.
do-
Sean? Okay, sorry.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I'll do a brief kind of, intro on this, that, I've been able to participate on some of the housing commission meetings along with Ethan Stuckmeyer, it's probably been almost a year or 9 months ago since we were able to come and kind of talk a little bit about what DLCD is doing with housing. And Parker had reached out to me and wanted to get an update kind of coming out of the short session and kind of where things are headed with some of the programs which our housing division is working on. And so I asked Sean Edging to be able to come and be able to speak to this. He'd be able to go into a little bit more specificity and detail than I could, and be able to answer any tougher questions that may come my way. So I was happy that Sean was able to join us today. So Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Brett. Yeah. And yeah, as Brett said, yeah, so I'm going to be focusing in on kind of one section of like what our overall housing picture looks like. There's other work that's happening in relationship to other legislative initiatives that, for the sake of time, I'm not going to dive into. But what I'll focus on is what happened in the 2024 session, what bills passed, what kind of do they contain, and how do they intersect with, our partners in Tillamook County as it relates to housing. I actually don't have the ability to share my screen. Do we have that? Because I do have slides.
Yeah, and I think we also have packets, right?
You'll be able to share your screen in one moment. We're adding the permissions.
So you guys probably have that in front of you too.
I think I saw Briar's on.
Yeah, I apologize. I had struggles getting in, but I'm present.
Good morning,
Okay.
Briar.
Good morning.
Wonderful. All right, are you all able to see my screen?
We can.
All right, perfect. Yeah, great. So yeah, as mentioned, I'm going to be focusing in really just on the bills that were passed in this recent short session. And I'm going to be talking as much as I can, focusing on kind of the intersection between, our agency's work, as well as the work of, our partners here in Tillamook County. Before I dive into it, I think you can kind of divide these various bills into kind of like four categories of policies that were adopted by the legislature. The first one, and I think this is the one we're all familiar with, it's all those like little changes to state law that are intended to, kind of boost production especially in the near term. And I'll talk about all those in more detail. A second component of this is on this idea of funding infrastructure to support the development of housing. This was kind of like a first, maybe a down payment in kind of that conversation, and some additional direction there. A third component of this is something called the Housing Accountability and Production Office, which is a joint office between DLCD and the Building Codes Division that I'll talk about more in detail later. And then finally, the kind of last policy is on this kind of alternative urban growth boundary amendment process. Again, I'll talk about that in more detail as we get into it. So I'll kind of go bill by bill, and I'll start with that first category of a lot of the different kind of small policies that were changed with the intent to kind of boost production in the near term. And I'll start with the Housing Policy Omnibus Bill. That's House Bill 4063. This is the bill that actually probably has the least intersection with Tillamook County. So for the sake of time, I know we only have 25 minutes for this agenda item. I'm not going to go into like exhaustive detail as to like what all it contains. In fact, a lot of these are kind of like different provisions that relate to, like some of them relate to kind of like metro counties or the implementation of the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis in metro counties, that type of thing. So for those, I'm not really going to talk about them. There's some other kind of like technical tweaks to statutes in terms of like how middle housing land divisions are conducted, or how home buyers can submit letters to sellers, that type of thing. Again, these are all really small tweaks, so I don't want to spend too much time on them. There is one that does intersect with cities and counties in Tillamook that I do want to maybe talk briefly about, and that's the second bullet here on opting into amended housing development regulations. And in short, what this provides kind of a tweak to is, if we can nerd out about like land use procedure for just a minute, there's this provision in statute that we call the goalpost rule. And essentially the idea here is, when an applicant for the development of housing is trying to understand, what development regulations apply when I submit my application. This statute provides clarity. It pretty much says when you submit your application, the standards that apply are those that were in effect at the date of the application submittal, right? And this is intended to kind of provide certainty for both the local government and the applicant that the standards that are in effect are going to be the ones that are in effect. They're not going to change underneath as the application is being worked through the process, right? But something that's been happening, which is pretty positive, has kind of raised this need for maybe a little bit of flexibility on the statute. And that's that a lot of local governments are adopting pro-housing regulations, right? So they're changing their codes, they're being more permissive, allowing more housing options. And a lot of developers are wanting to opt into that. And, once they're in the process, right, they're kind of locked into a specific set of standards. And so what this does is it kind of provides this pathway. If an applicant, sees this new sets of standards, they want to opt into it, it kind of provides this pathway to facilitate that. It resets a lot of the clocks. It kind of enables charging additional fees related to that review and, provides enough time for the city or county to be able to kind of review the application under the new standards. But it provides this pathway, right, that an applicant can kind of opt into a new set of development standards if they choose to do so. And of course, there's some provisions around this to make sure that it's workable for reviewing entities as well. So that's the first one. Also, I know you guys might have questions. For the sake of time, I'm going to ask to maybe hold those to the end. We can have maybe a broader discussion because I know I'm going to be touching on these at kind of a high level for all of them. So just keep that in mind as we go through. All right, the second slide. This is also on some more of those kind of small tweaks. This first one, I think, might have an intersection with a lot of different Tillamook jurisdictions if they choose. And this is direction to our agency. Essentially, what it kind of provides is a pot of funding and some direction to develop model codes in relationship to housing. Now, DLCD, we often produce model codes as kind of a best practice or guidance documents for local governments to, give them tools on how they approach to, regulating the development of different things, including housing. I mean, we have a lot of different model codes, but this bill provides us some very specific direction. It wants us to develop 3 tiers of model codes, one for very small cities below 2,500, one for cities between 2,500 and 25,000 in population, and one for 25,000 in population or greater. So kind of recognizing the different sizes of cities with considerations for things like geography, and to produce them for different housing types. So one for single family detached, ADUs, middle housing, which we do have a model code for that, and multifamily housing. And what this kind of provides, it also has a little bit of incentive, right? So these model codes often just act as a resource for local governments, but one provision that's provided in the statute is an ability if a city decides that they really want to opt into a particular set of standards. Maybe they really like the ADU standards. What this bill allows them to do is to adopt something by reference. And they have kind of presumptions that it's clear and objective, that it's up to date. They don't have to worry about, being sued under the basis of, any given particular housing law, that type of thing. And they have some clarity and certainty that when they adopt, a particular part of a model code, that they can just use it and apply it, and DLCD will kind of take care of the maintenance. It's really intended to help, especially small cities who have kind of outdated codes. If they want to opt into a particular housing type and into a set of best practices on development regulations, they have that option. Okay, so that's that bill. We're going to be working on that over the next couple of years. And of course, there'll be plenty of process for folks to be involved and to be able to provide feedback on how those model codes operate. The second bill, this one actually doesn't have any relationship to anything happening in Tillamook County. This actually happened in a kind of controversial urban growth boundary amendment in North Plains. Essentially, there was kind of this, initiative to refer an urban growth boundary amendment to the ballot, which we didn't know that was like a thing that you could consider doing. But essentially, the legislature stepped in. They adopted this bill that says you can't do that. You can't refer to the ballot. It is something that is done by local governments. And it was backdated, of course, to resolve that issue that was playing out in North Plains. All right. I'm going to move on to talking about infrastructure funding. This was one of those components that I was mentioning at the top of this presentation. And there was actually a little bit of disagreement here. So there's some direction to DLCD that I think will be relevant to folks in the room here and, of course, around the state. But one of the things that was in a report that we provided to the legislature in 2023, the Oregon Housing Needs Analysis legislative recommendations, after hearing, talking with jurisdictions around the state, I think one consistent theme that we really heard was this idea that the state needs to step in with funding infrastructure if we want to see housing, especially in markets where the market's not going to produce the housing on its own, right? So if we want to see affordable housing, we want to see housing in like small communities, rural communities, we're really going to need to step up with investments in infrastructure to support that. And these two bills, House Bill 4134 and 1530, are kind of like a first step of the legislature acknowledging, yes, we need to fund infrastructure if we want to see production. And one of the kind of maybe tensions that exists here is the legislature really wanted to, I guess, as stated in kind of some of the news articles, to cut red tape, right? So to kind of bypass the state agency distribution of funding and make direct appropriations to local governments for specific infrastructure projects to facilitate the production of housing, right? So in both of these bills, there's some differences in the details of what exact funding sources they do and what exactly they fund. But essentially, in most all of these bills, the amounts of funding that is appropriated are made directly to individual local governments for specific projects that are intended to support the production of housing. I should mention this was not without controversy. The executive branch had kind of expressed this preference, right? Because, right, some folks were left out of that process that, maybe state agencies can better kind of distribute that and to be able to communicate with partners. And so one of the things that kind of came out of these bills is some direction to DLCD to kind of dive into this a little bit deeper. And that actually takes us into our last bill that we're going to be talking about. And that is Senate Bill 1537. This is probably the most extensive bill, so I'm going to spend the most time on this. But to kind of touch on that infrastructure piece, that's that fourth bullet right down here. In kind of response to this, they gave our agency, DLCD, essentially recommendations, or sorry, not direction to kind of engage with folks around the state. That includes local governments, that includes housing developers, that includes, community-based organizations, nonprofits, all of the folks around the state that, intersect with the housing production process. And to really engage in this conversation of, if we're going to invest in infrastructure and we have limited dollars, how do we best prioritize our investments to achieve the goals of like production, housing production across the state, right? And so this is something that will be kind of kicking off in the months to come. We're essentially going to be kind of engaging with different folks. You'll be obviously, of course, apprised when those conversations start. And we really want to get a broad base of folks around the state to kind of talk through how these different priorities should happen to facilitate our goals, right? And what can we consider? What can we deliver to the legislature that they could actually use to kind of make prioritization on funding decisions in the future? So that's that infrastructure piece. And so I'll pivot to talking about some of the other pieces now. And I'll start with the Housing Accountability and Production Office. And this was one of those components I mentioned at the top. This is a joint office or direction to establish a joint office between our agency, the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and the Building Codes Division, right? And it gives us some time to do that. It gives us different amounts of resources to start staffing up these various offices. And essentially the purpose of this office is kind of twofold. One is on the application of kind of statewide housing laws. I know many of you guys in the room are familiar with certain state laws that are related to middle housing. Turns out there's a lot of different state laws that kind of intersect with local development regulations that kind of affect how housing is developed on the ground. And one of the roles of this office is to kind of serve as a resource for local governments, for housing developers, to kind of navigate that intersection, to navigate that process, and to kind of reduce barriers to the production of housing. And it provides us a lot of tools and funding and direction to kind of develop resources to support local governments where we identify, maybe incongruencies between state law and local development codes to kind of address those, right? And so what this looks like essentially, a lot of my job is reviewing local codes, providing feedback on, that intersection with state law. And this really amps up kind of that, as well as the provision of funding to kind of address issues, and really opens this up to kind of developers that are navigating the process as well. So that's one kind of role for this office. The second role is on statewide coordination. So DLCD is one player at the state agency level in relationship to the development of housing. BCD is another. We haven't historically coordinated that much on housing production before, and this is obviously direction to do that. There are other state agencies that do this and intersect with the development of housing too, right? We can obviously think of folks like ODOT, DEQ, Business Oregon, Oregon Housing and Community Services, all of which have a role to play in the housing production picture, and all of which haven't really coordinated very well on facilitating housing production. And so a second role of this office is to really start doing that, start coordinating between these different state agencies around this picture of housing development and housing production. And so for both of these, we don't really know what this is going to look like yet. We have to kind of staff up first. We have to have the team to be able to implement these and kind of go through a process to establish how do our offices operate? What do we do? How do we prioritize different things? And of course, that will be a conversation that we have with our partners as that gets rolling. So definitely expect more on that. All right, the next piece I'll talk about, and I'm going to kind of breeze through these because, again, I want to leave some time for questions. I mentioned that we had a lot of those little pieces in statute that were intended to kind of facilitate production. This bill included a lot of those, and many of them are kind of temporary. So they only last for a couple of years. The intent is to kind of facilitate the near-term production of housing, right? One of these, I've already mentioned before, that opting into new housing regulations. This is just the same thing that was in that omnibus bill, just included in this bill. So it's not a change in the statute. It's just the same provision of enabling opting into new regulations. But there are a lot of other little things that came up that were intended to kind of facilitate production. One is on kind of attorney's fees. Essentially, if a local government approves a housing project and say a third party decides they want to appeal it to kind of delay it, this provides an avenue that if LUBA kind of affirms the local government's decision, they can award attorney's fees to both the city and the applicant, city or county, and the applicant, if the decision is affirmed. There's this housing project kind of revolving loan fund. I won't talk a lot about the details. Essentially, this is a kind of big pot of money that enables financing of middle income housing and kind of paying it back via kind of deferred property taxes on that housing to pay back the loan. It's kind of enables, kind of expanding those dollars and using them a little bit further than if you just provided a grant. This next piece is on this thing called housing land use adjustments. The way to think about this is as a kind of temporary, it lasts for 7 years, a set of like a process by which a developer for affordable housing or market rate housing under certain circumstances, they can request specific kind of adjustments to different land use standards in a development code. So things like setbacks, parking, and there's kind of limitations to that. Like this doesn't affect kind of like major environmental regulations or life safety pieces, but kind of provides this a little bit of regulatory relief for kind of specific projects in certain circumstances. The next piece is on limited land use decisions. I'm not going to nerd out about this one too much. We've already nerded out about land use procedure. Essentially, this is a provision about kind of lowering the review chain for reviewing different kind of housing applications and reviewing them more at the staff level. So that way, fewer housing applications are reviewed at kind of the planning commission level and, hitting kind of some of the political wins that can hit that, things like subdivisions. And then this last piece, this is kind of that fourth pillar that I mentioned, is on this alternative urban growth boundary amendment process. And essentially what this does is it opens 3 alternatives. So we have an existing urban growth boundary amendment process that exists in the statewide land use planning program. Essentially, if a city identifies a land deficit, they can go through a process to amend their urban growth boundary to bring new lands into their urban growth boundary. But, the process takes time and analysis, that type of thing. Essentially what this provides is an alternative. It kind of lightens up on some of those requirements for analysis, and it opens up one of 3 pathways for a local government. 2 of those pathways require meeting these kind of need requirements. So not every local government is going to be eligible. It kind of depends on what the data says about their local housing need and whether they have a kind of an identified land need. And there's a lot of details about how that works. But if they meet that criteria, they essentially have one of 2 options. They can either expand their UGB to include, I believe it's 50 acres if they're below 25,000 or 100 acres if they're above 25,000. They have to do a bunch of kind of concept planning and infrastructure planning for this particular area, and there's only some areas that you can expand into. But once they complete that, they can essentially expand their UGB without doing the kind of standard typical process to facilitate the provision of housing, including a mix of subsidized affordable housing. So there's requirements for affordability that are baked into these pathways. The second option is a smaller scale version of that. Essentially, if a city opts to do something that's 15 acres or less, they don't have to do the concept planning, but they still have to provide this for affordable housing. There's like deed restriction requirements to guarantee the provision of affordable housing. So those two are not open to every jurisdiction, right? You have to meet certain need requirements or thresholds in order to qualify for this. Those will be, kind of determined in the future. We're going to be developing an FAQ document on this, talking about this in more detail. But this third pathway is open to all local governments. And this one is a iteration on an existing process we have. We have this thing called the Urban Growth Boundary Land Exchange. And what this pathway does is it enables a city, if they have land in their UGB, but it's not particularly developable, they can go through a process to swap that out with lands outside of the urban growth boundary. And what this alternative does is it kind of takes that process and it says, all right, we're going to reduce some of the analytical requirements with this, on how you actually facilitate that, exchange. It's going to be open to a narrower subset of lands, but it's kind of this more flexible option that is available to local governments as an alternative to the other two. So if they decide that maybe the right pathway for them is to facilitate an exchange of lands, this kind of provides an easier pathway to do that. It doesn't have the affordability requirements, though a city, they can consider that if they want to, incentivize the provision of affordable housing from folks outside of the UGB. Folks want to opt into putting in deed restrictions to come into the UGB. That's something the city has the option to do, but it's essentially a lot more flexible of an alternative to the standard UGB exchange process without the same kind of planning requirements that are associated with the other alternative UGB amendment processes. So that's kind of the basics of what that looks like. There's a lot of details and kind of technical wonkiness that I'm not going to go into for the sake of time. And I wanted to also just leave, a little bit of time for all of y'all's questions to kind of, especially for the things that I didn't cover in this presentation. But with that, I'll stop sharing screen, kind of open it up for questions.
I mean, this is less of a question and more of a comment. Thank you for how you explained all of that. A lot of times this stuff goes over my head when people start getting into the weeds of all of the Senate bills and all that. And you did a really nice way of doing it. I guess I do have a question. What of all of these, what one do you feel like is the most applicable and maybe the most exciting for Tillamook County? Like what has the most potential for impact, I guess?
That's a good question. I think probably in the long term, I think the one that has the most impact is on this infrastructure funding conversation. And I'm speaking, this is my opinion. I'm not speaking on the policy merits of the various bills.
I want your opinion. I like the way you talk.
Yeah, but I think almost everybody in this room probably recognizes or can think about challenges in the provision of infrastructure to support housing. And that's true across the state, right? And I think one of the biggest kind of pieces to consider in relationship to these bills is there's this opportunity and recognition from the legislature that, hey, we got to step up at the state to really support our local partners in funding these gaps in infrastructure. And how do we do that in a way that's thoughtful, that, provides opportunity for everybody to be able to kind of participate in that. And to facilitate the production of housing. That hasn't really happened before, at least in my time at DLCD, which of course is limited. I know there's more history that extends far back before my career. But yeah, no, I think that's probably the most exciting thing that I can see on the horizon.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about the revolving loan fund. Who administers that?
Yeah, I believe that is OHCS. And I believe the way it works is a local government can kind of set up a revolving loan fund kind of program. I think there's specific requirements in it. I'm certainly not an expert in it, so hopefully I can't provide advice on how to do this. But essentially they can set up a fund to finance specific projects, and OHCS can pay into that fund, and then it's paid back through kind of deferred property taxes. So what would have been collected in property taxes pays back the loan to OHCS. The intent is to kind of further those dollars than if they were just provided as a grant, right? It would just be one time and then they're gone.
Sean, do you know what the terms of that revolving loan fund might be? And is that a part of this $10.6 million appropriation? So would the starting balance in that fund be a portion of that 10.6 million?
Oh, no, sorry. The appropriation for that fund is 75 million. The appropriation that you saw on the screen, that was to DLCD to like staff up, to have a pot for local technical assistance, right? That type of thing. Um, the difference for like infrastructure funding, infrastructure is way more expensive than planning. And so a lot of those are much bigger pots of funding. The project revolving loan fund is about 75 million. I don't know the specific terms. I think that extends kind of outside of my expertise on financing. But I could at least look into who at OACS is kind of working on the administration of that fund, and reach out with some contact information.
So Sean, this Office of Accountability, and is it part of DLCD or is it under the governor, or how is it fit in there?
Yeah, it's a joint office between our agency and Building Codes Division. Essentially, we have to enter an interagency agreement, right?
Yep.
Yeah, that's kind of the structure for it.
Hey, Sean, I know you said you don't have all the information on the revolving loan fund, but do you know if that is restricted to just affordable housing, or workforce housing something that can be part of that?
Yeah, so the specifics of this bill, it's open to affordable housing. It's also open to middle income. So I believe the like upper limit for middle income is like 120% median family income, kind of recognizing that, for like middle income housing projects, oftentimes like they don't need a grant necessarily or like dedicated direct funding, but oftentimes even just like preferential financing can kind of help overcome some of those gaps or barriers, right, to facilitate production. And that's really the intent behind this, is to kind of overcome that with a loan that's paid back essentially by deferred property taxes.
I have a very specific question, might not be in your bailiwick, but you don't happen to know if the governor signed off on $2.7 million intended for infrastructure in Manzanita?
It got signed.
It got signed? Okay, because anyhow, they're budgeting and they never mind.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We're just nerding out here, I know.
Yes.
In other ways.
No, totally understand.
It does.
Anybody online have any questions for Sean? All right, thank you so much.
Brett wants to add.
Yeah, thank you guys for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Super informative.
Yeah, and Parker, on the whole, and Sean, I'll let you know this as well. I'm part of the North Coast Regional Solutions team, and OHCS has a regional rep that's part of our North Coast Regional Solutions team. I'm actually going into a regional solutions team at 10 o'clock, and I'll let Nate Stice know that this was discussed. And Sean, if any information you can gather, that'd be great. I'll pass on to Nate, and if y'all are wanting to dig into that a little bit more, I can help. Try to be able to partner with OHCF reps to be able to speak to you in the future.
That'd be great.
I do, actually, I have one more question that just popped in my head. I know that there has been some interest already in the urban growth boundary work, I think in Bay City. And the question is, how long will it take before that process is actually live and communities can get assistance? And will that assistance come from DLCD?
Yeah. So first, I think the bill it should be in effect, I believe, in sometime in June. So I think the pathway would be like technically open at that time, so a city can start pursuing or looking into it at that time. I think that a bigger challenge is, how do you exactly get through the process? That's something that raises a lot of kind of technical questions, because it's an alternative process. I wouldn't describe it necessarily as like easier than the typical UGB amendment process. Though maybe the exchange definitely is. And one thing that we're evaluating right now, so there's this pot of technical assistance funding that was for the HAPO, right, to provide assistance to local governments to, do things like amend codes or reduce barriers to housing production in their local development codes, that type of thing. And, we received this kind of, I believe there's a letter submitted on the record from the governor directing us to also open up this funding for, potential UGB amendment proposals. One thing that we're evaluating right now, we want to get feedback from our DOJ just to make sure that the statute is worded that we have the statutory authority to do that, right? So that's something that we're also kind of considering. So once that starts rolling out, and once we start developing a kind of procurement process that local governments can request specific like asks, that's when we'll be able to start kind of, publicizing the availability of resources to support that.
Okay, so it's under development.
Yeah.
So,
And Commissioner Carr, if I could do one follow-up question to yours. Sean, and you'd mentioned kind of an FAQ document that may be coming out. You want to maybe talk a little bit about that in regards to the process?
Yeah. So right now, one of the things that we're kind of doing at the DLCD Housing Division, so we have a lot of work to do. We have to hire a bunch of people, right, to stand up this office. But one thing we're doing in the meantime, in lieu of kind of like formal guidance documents, we're just trying to solicit questions. Like, what are the questions that folks have about Senate Bill 1537? And there's different components of that, obviously. And what can we provide, like, some clarity or answers on. And so, we're essentially shooting to publish these documents sometime kind of like in early summer. But right now, we're kind of in question gathering mode. So if you have questions, definitely reach out to our team. Brett, I'm sure you've shared the housing email address. Yeah, of course. So that's a place to definitely reach out to us, and kind of, if you have specific questions, we'd be happy to, field those and incorporate them into our overall FAQ, and of course, answer them too,
Okay, thank you, Sean, I appreciate that.
I have a really quick question about the urban growth boundary stuff. One, and this is I'm gonna walk through this and try and ask it in the most eloquent way possible, but it might be a little rough. So in that urban growth boundary potential, does it allow for municipals to be able to like upgrade utilities with some of the space that's gonna be like sewer or water or any of those things? Like, is there anything that's addressing the need for some of those things to be able to be added, or funding for some of that stuff to be able to go in and allow for the infrastructure to be built?
Yeah, so the bill actually requires, so if you're pursuing a UGB amendment, right? So one of the bigger ones, right? One of the requirements is that the city has to do public facilities planning to make sure that when the land is brought into the UGB, it's not going to be sitting vacant, right? Like they've actually done the planning to identify, all right, what do we need in terms of, pipes, roads, all that type of stuff to facilitate the production of housing once this is brought into the UGB. There's no specific provisions in the bill that provide funding to local governments to do that. That's not saying that there aren't other sources of funding, right? Like the legislature just made very significant investments in infrastructure just now, for example. But the thing is, there's nothing in the bill that provides that for local governments, right? So in lieu of that, they would need to essentially figure out how they are going to, whatever that funding plan is to support the production of housing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Sean. Have a great day. Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, thank you.
Y'all have a great day.
Question for Megan. I know it's early, but are there any scenarios in these three alternatives that are workable for the city of Tillamook that could help?
So we're looking at infrastructure funding, but like I've mentioned before, our current infrastructure is the problem, not the future. Right now, we have to deal with just the current, and we're looking at about 60 million just to fix our current infrastructure. We can't add on to that until we get our current infrastructure fixed. So doing a UGB expansion is gonna be amazing. We want it, but we have to fix our current first. So unless somebody's got $100 million stuffed in their pocket somewhere, we're not looking at, especially with the promises that we have to keep if we do expand our UGB.
And this is a completely like, I don't know, this is like me not having any idea if this is even a thing. Can you have two, like within a city, can you have two separate treatment plans?
You could, if somebody want to do a private one, and have an agreement with us,
Okay,
bypass it and then go
Yeah,
directly to.
like for that whole
Or
side of
even
town.
digest at that property.
Okay,
That's something that we can look into.
okay.
And I'd love to come back to this conversation. I do know that our next speaker does have time requirements, so I'd like to have them get going right now, but I don't want to cut this short, but we will have time at the end and we're going to come back to it. But with that, I'd like to invite Sarah Lou Heath from Colpack. And in your packets today is a small scope of work regarding the agreement that we are considering, that we are developing with Colpack to help us with the financial administration and the ability to issue our funds as a forgivable loan. So with that, I will pass it off to Sarah Lou, and thank you so much for being here, Sarah.
Well, sure thing. I just want to recognize my colleagues, Lydia and Colin, are here with me as well. I'm hoping that Parker did a little amendment on a couple places where I left him some opportunity to fill in some blanks there. But, oh, okay, well, consider this a very draft that we've been working on together. Parker came to Colpack a little while ago with a few opportunities that we thought were really interesting and kind of some requests for services that we are able to offer. And so that is really program development and then program administration that's related to the Tillamook. You've renamed it, but I'm going to call it the Tillamook Multifamily Housing Fund. So I believe that the motivation for this came about in trying to get as many of the dollars that you deploy from your fee revenue on short-term rentals into developers' hands, and using a tool like a forgivable loan sounded like a good idea. And so Colpack runs a couple RLFs, one for small business development and one for brownfields cleanup. So this is a natural fit with what we do. The scope you're looking at covers some time for collaboration with Parker and the commission and the county commission to develop kind of the standard operating procedures that the program will use, define roles and responsibilities, really have the documentation for the program in line so applicants can use it as guidance. The commission can use it as a reference. And then if all of that goes as expected, we've outlined costs for some services that we have been talking about providing. That would be administration of grants, executing documents, bringing in checks, recording them, sending invoices, closeout agreements. And then also for forgivable loans, there's a couple things you need to do to keep those in the true sense of a forgivable loan. That includes providing conditions to be met for forgiveness, and also underwriting the ability for people to pay back these loans if those conditions are not met. And so that's why there is an underwriting cost separate from the administration costs. I'm hoping that I am talking about things that you are all aware of and have been prepped for, because I dove right in. So I'll be happy to answer questions, or maybe Parker can close any gaps that I've left open.
That was very succinct, and I think this is something we've been talking about, and I've been providing updates as we've been developing it. But this is kind of, the chance for us to take this conversation to the next level of seriousness, and for you all to make sure that you feel that you understand this and are informed. Yes.
Do we vote at some point on this proposed relationship?
I believe that.
And it's today a day to do that.
I think you would be providing a recommendation to the commissioners that you think this is a good way to move forward. And I think it could either come as a vote or it could come as a consensus recommendation. It's kind of how you all want to do it.
And we can develop the nitty gritty details of this before we take it to the county commissioners, as I assume. And then they might say that they might make some changes there as well. So.
And if I may, there was just one point I wanted to add in there. There's kind of two separate costs, and one is about developing the program and answering some questions and getting consensus on that. And that's something that I think is separate from the ongoing administration of an underwriting of the program. So because there are a number of things to work out ahead of time. We've got some ideas, but
Is that what's reflected here? So that program development, that's that 2,500 to 5,000, and then the program administration, like that's how it's broke out.
that's correct.
Okay, perfect.
And there is, I think that Parker and I made a decision yesterday on this, but we are hoping that legal agreements will come from the county and keep that program development cost down. If we need to
Right.
engage with our legal services, that would change.
Yeah, similarly with enforcement action, we imagine that that is something that we would handle on our side if there was someone who became delinquent.
Sarah, can you give us an example or tell us about any other counties or cities that you guys work with in these terms?
I don't think that we are managing a fund like this for any other county. We do manage revolving loan funds that are funding provided from the USDA and the EPA. And so we work with recipients of those funds across our whole region, Columbia, Clatsop, Tillamook, and Western Washington counties. We have done fund management in the past, for example, with the Clatsop County Child Care Initiative. They needed to hire a staff person, make grants to child care providers, et cetera. And so my colleague Lydia managed that relationship and those responsibilities.
I would like to add and remind you all that this is not only about Colpac helping us with our Housing Production Solutions Fund, but as we are out attempting to get pass-through funding from sources like the EPA, Colpac will be able to make sure that we can meet the financial obligations of administering those programs as well. And having them here to be able to take our Housing Production Solutions Fund and be able to administer it as a forgivable loan, it's almost a bonus compared to the help we'll need with some of these bigger funds that will require reporting to the federal government.
Speaking of which, is that funding, that revolving loan fund that was just presented, a potential example of when, the way I understood him to say it, that we would establish a local program and then the funds would come from OHCS into that and then it'd be administered at the local level. So would this be an example of how we could do that?
That's not something that Sarah and Lou and I have specifically talked about, using like state funding and OHCS kind of resources passing through Colpac, but I believe that they'd be willing, or that would be an option.
I think it's in our wheelhouse in something like that. We would just need to understand more and have that conversation, but it's certainly in our wheelhouse.
Well, and so for like you two, this would be something that would take things off of your plate in terms of like grant administration and making sure that you're paying attention to, okay, maybe not. Sarah's plate, on Sarah's plate, okay.
And county council and the
Right.
treasury office.
It kind of gives that fiduciary responsibility to somebody else that's handling that, managing the grant timelines and managing some of that.
It does. And
Other
the things
piece.
that we do are just a little bit outside the wheelhouse of a traditional, county treasury office. And so bringing in specialists really does create a lot of
that's good stuff.
efficiency, and it takes a ton off of their plate.
Yeah, that's huge.
So one of the things that I've been frustrated with is that the time it takes, right, to get those dollars working, right? So Sarah, do you think that you guys would be, have a quicker timeline than our county does in doing some of these things once we get set up?
Yes and no. Once we get set up, yes. We've been having conversations about who monitors conditions, where decision-making responsibility lies, and all of that will be defined and codified in the program development part. Once we move into the actual administration part, I think grants will go really quickly. It's anticipated that your group is still going to make the recommendation to fund those, and we'll just have an agreement that gets signed, we mail a check, we do the maintenance. For the forgivable loans, underwriting times really vary depending on the person looking for the loan. We've had some people return whole packet of information, it's all correct, it's the right years, it's in a format that we can download and read. We've had other people that take some time to provide the documents needed. And so it's kind of in the hands of the applicant.
So for our process, maybe making sure that those ducks are in a row would
That's
be
what I
pretty
do.
important.
I help on their
Yeah.
end and make sure that when they submit to Colpack, everything is nice and neat and ready to go.
Yeah.
Which is true, like with any lender, like that's actually a thing, right? It depends on the person. They're not all going to come forward with the same or be on the same timeline to actually bring their documents, even if they're given in a nice, pretty list. So it's up to the individual.
That the key piece of this is that what happened in our end that slowed much of it down was this is not a process the county is familiar with or uses. So each loan agreement had to be written specific for what the particular, developer was looking for. And there were all these things, and it's just not what we do. It is what Colpack does. So
Yeah,
this
that's
is a
amazing.
solution that I think will speed it up. Chris, to your point, from the county side, our county council is a generalist, right? So our generalist county council was trying to figure out what this should look like. They already know this is what they do. So I think it will be a good piece. I think there is a cost to it, and I think it's a cost that we should absolutely spend, but I don't want the Housing Commission to misunderstand that the county is paying that cost from anywhere else. It's coming from the housing fund. So you might find that what you have to give away is 380,000 instead of 400, because there's 20,000 that is set aside for Colpack or something along those lines. So just to be clear, the county's general fund is not going to be supporting the Colpack participation. It will come out of the housing money.
And I think that's fair to shove that in the bucket of the cost of doing business. I mean,
I think that it is.
like really
Especially
their
the efficiencies will gain.
correct. It's like keeping some of the people out of the weeds that when there's a company that has the ability to be in the weeds and does it every day, that makes things go much quicker and much smoother.
I'd also add that, some of the costs are per loan. So we will have to consider how many projects we want to support a little more carefully in the future than taking a more shotgun approach and making sure that everybody gets a piece.
So Sarah, I guess as I had envisioned this was money that belongs to the county that is flowing through your organization, and that you would provide administrative services. So this idea that your organization is going to be doing the underwriting is kind of a new concept for me. We do a fair amount of underwriting here before we come to a decision. And once we've made a decision, I didn't see it as a recommendation to Colpack. Instead, it was, here's the grantee, or here's the borrower. Would you please administer that for us? So seeing a $4,000 to $6,000 underwriting fee at your rates, that's 40 to 60 hours per forgivable loan. And I think, gosh, that's a lot of time, particularly since we've already done the underwriting. And in my limited experience, those grant agreements and those loan agreements are pretty much boilerplate. So I guess once we've decided that a borrower is got the sufficient resources and so on to borrow these monies or to be granted these monies, I don't think we need a lot of underwriting. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think that's a really good question, and it's one that we've had internally because we also understand that some of these forgivable loans are 5-digit loans that might be pretty simply collateralized. I'm not familiar with the process that you undertake during your decision-making process, and I think that's something that we'll investigate when we do the program development. For us to, there's one thing that we haven't talked about, which is Colpack's Loan Administration Board. And we had a conversation with them last week, and we feel that the decision-making responsibility should lie with the Tillamook County Commissioners, but we're anticipating a process that might look like the Housing Commission, your group, does your work, makes your decisions, makes a recommendation to us. We fill in any underwriting that we feel might be necessary to add, review that. Our loan board would review our work and then make a final recommendation that would have 2 recommendations then behind it to the Tillamook County Commission. So I think that the way you're thinking is really smart and understandable, and we're just going to need more engagement to build that decision-making process, go over the roles and responsibilities, and come to that final conclusion on how much work each party is going to have.
So clarifying question with that, with that middle pass through, would you be looking at like making sure that like, I know lending has a whole lot of different rules and regulations surrounding how they're doing that. There's a different set of governing rules that follow that. Is that what you guys would be looking at to make sure that, it's not in violation of any kind of like fair housing stuff or anything along those lines? Or what would that purpose be in that middle section?
At this point, I don't think that any of the work that you're funding is real construction, is material construction. I could be wrong. But just from the conversations that I have had with Parker, they've all been really pre-development work. But right now, the outline of costs you're looking at does not cover conditions monitoring, which is what we call kind of what you just referred to. Are you, if your forgivable loan is conditioned on providing a geotechnical report, did you provide that report? If it does involve material construction, then Parker has those relationships, and we anticipate that those conditions will be monitored by Parker. All of the fair housing needs, any federal crosscutters, you won't have federal crosscutters because of how you derive this revenue. We would want to make sure that that is in the agreement. And if there's any relevant documentation to that, we would want that on file before dispersing funds. If that's, you need to ensure that you are not, you have anti-discrimination policies and are following all those practices. We would ask that from the applicant before dispersing funds. So again, I think that's a little bit program development. There's a lot of decisions to be made before we start.
So Sarah, I guess my thought is that if this is the county's monies, then at some point in time, an entity has an asset on their financial statement called loan receivable. And I'm guessing that would be an asset of the county, not of COPAC. This is the county's loan receivable. And I guess I was thinking of this more akin to a escrow company service, whereby we ask you to make these collections to figure the interest, give us annual 1099, distribute those, tell us what our outstanding balance is. But to have your loan board see this as a recommendation by us to them to make a loan on our behalf of our money seems to be a little outside, at least what I was thinking, and perhaps more administrative time and cost than we need at this point. So do you think your group would be willing to do this without your loan board's approval? Given that it's the county's money?
I think that I would have to go back to the board to ask that question to them. If we are administering a program, we do want to ensure that it is in line with our mission and goals, your mission and goals, that, we're kind of giving our promise that if we're managing these funds, that they are being spent appropriately, wisely, etc. So that's not a question that I can answer for the loan board.
And so I think it's our responsibility to make sure that the funds are being used appropriately and wisely. But we don't need to look to COPAC to do that for us.
That's certainly a decision that you can make.
And I'm just speaking for myself, of course, not for the
I
commission.
think that has been the perspective of the commission, is that we have the subject matter experts and a lot of vetting that's taking place around this table. And so it does seem redundant. I do think that a lot of the due diligence so far has been being done by Parker's role, and that would be expected to continue. So in my view, I think the underwriting, based on the earlier question and answer, makes more sense to be an hourly rate. And that the agreement that gets written up with the roles and responsibilities needs to be really clear who's taking the risk. And who's providing the assurances. And I feel like that there's a path forward for that. I realize Sarah has to go to her board on their end to feel comfortable, but I feel like Dave's right, but I think that there's a more logical path forward than how we're kind of framing this up right now, based on the level of risk, and the level of due diligence Tillamook is prepared to provide.
So I would just chime in. I think there's two pieces that we're talking about here. One is the 400,000 that comes from the county. And I think the county's pretty comfortable with the review of the housing commission on that. When we start talking about the $3.6 million that's coming from the EPA.
Or the financing option potentially from the OFA.
Correct. That's a whole different level of review, and I appreciate that you all as volunteers do the level of review that you do. But when that federal money hits and Tillamook County is signing on the bottom line that we're gonna meet all those federal requirements, I don't know that the county's going to be comfortable relying on the housing commission at that point. So I think that what we're building here is a structure that hopefully will allow us to have lots of different kinds of funding ultimately flowing through the county as the recipient, but making sure that all of the underlying pieces of it are done. If, COPAC may be where some of that happens because they understand that whole revolving loan piece. Similarly, if we decide to take on one of those revolving loan projects from the state, that's tax increment financing. It has a whole nother set of things that go with it that our assessor would have to do, that again, a whole bunch of things we have to meet. And please don't take any offense. You guys are an amazing group, but you are a group of volunteers who change fares. Right now, we have you, Dave, and you have a pretty deep set of knowledge in this. But the county has to make sure that no matter who's seated at this table, no matter what their level of expertise is, that we have protected the county. So I agree, I hear you guys, and I agree that it seems like, why would we send what we've already vetted for county money to a loan board? And I'm totally open to, let's have that conversation, let's have it with, because I have to have it with county council and the treasurer, right? But I feel like if we want to have this option open for all these other funding sources, we need to build something that provides the backdrop and protection for the county. Or I think we may run into trouble for the county being willing to take that on into the future. And I don't want that to happen. There's too much good work happening in this group. And with funding coming in, that I don't want a seated board of commissioners to say, time out, that's too much risk for us. So I want to develop this tool that says we have a risk mitigation tool for the county itself by working with some folks who have a deep expertise in this that we know will always be available to us. Does that make sense and help?
Well, some of this stuff is managing liability, right? So when
It's
you're
managing risk.
when you're dealing with like the liability of some of these things, it can get pretty costly if it goes south. And so by having a middle, you utilize the escrow company as like this, like that kind of idea behind it. They carry a lot of that liability for some of these things. And so by having an extra set of eyes, I absolutely can see where that's a piece that goes in just to kind of like mitigate some of that responsibility to the county and quite frankly to us.
So Sarah, what's your staff level at COPAC?
That's a great question. Right now we are 3 full-time employees. I manage my colleague Lydia, who I believe is here on the call with us, and she is our kind of underwriting expert and manages the programs that we have in existence right now.
Thanks. Our business had a USDA loan that you guys administered, so we've worked with COPAC before.
I love that. Awesome. And I just want to say that I think these are all really good questions that should all be considered. And what we put forward was answering some things that we had talked about. This is not a, take it or leave it proposal. It's kind of in the discussions that we have, these are the ballparks that we're looking at. And just with only 3 full-time staff, we are looking to maybe engage in that program development work so we can look holistically at your existing programs and what might come forward and get us down the road. I'm not sure that we were going to settle everything all today.
No, this was a place to start. This was the place to take the conversation to the next level of seriousness and ask these important questions.
Thanks for joining us, Sarah.
Absolutely. Well, I hope to hear from you soon and just send any questions our way.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Poland's the executive director. Jumped on our, you wanted to say.
Colin, did you want to say hello? Turn your camera on.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. I apologize. It's I'm on the road here. In fact, joining Brett, who was on the meeting earlier at that Governor's Regional Solution Team here in Westport, Clatsop County, and really appreciate the conversation. I listened to the majority of it, and there were some really thoughtful and good questions. And we look forward, as Sarah Lou has already said, to being involved with Tillamook County to help you with your housing needs. So thanks very much.
Thanks. Have a good meeting.
All right,
Okay.
thanks. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, you too. Parker, do you want to go on to the next agenda item?
Yes, I would. The next agenda item is just seeking approval for a letter in support of Helping Hands and their Tillamook Hope Center. They are requesting an expansion of their emergency crisis and outreach center to the second floor. To give you some background on this, most of the construction has been done on the second floor of their building out there at the port. And they are just trying to dot their T's, dot their I's, cross their T's, and get that project to the next level. They have a hearing coming tomorrow. Is that it? I think it's tomorrow. Anyways, they need the letter signed by today if they're going to get it.
Next week.
In. Next week?
Next Thursday.
Next Thursday. There it is. That's right. So this is just a letter I've written. If anybody would like to make any changes, edits, of course, I'll expect an email from Kristen later. And but I do just wanted to get everyone's approval to sign it. I will. I've been unsure how to actually add a housing commission signature line to some of these letters. So what I'm gonna do from now and into the future is list out everybody who's here and just do one of those big digital signatures for each one of you, if that's okay. Just so that it has a list of signatures at the bottom of the letter physically. If anyone objects to that, please let me know and I will find a way to let you actually sign it or whatever you would prefer.
We could, but I just wonder about just having the chair name be the digital signature and just a list of all the commissioner names below that and just keep it a little cleaner.
Yeah, that's great too. I think happy to do that unless anybody has any other suggestions or strong feelings.
I could run it through DocuSign for everybody if they really wanted to sign it.
Right.
If that would be it.
That might be a little work. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like.
I go for efficient solution.
Yeah.
I just like to say,
There you go.
the Helping Hands, one of the educational classes are, I have this dental thing that I got, so let's Bible this. 4 weeks. One of them is the financial literacy classes that Tillamook County Wellness is leading there, and they're really going well, and it's really wonderful. So it's been integrated into their curriculum as a standard requirement for their clients that are in their reentry program to attend the 6 financial literacy classes. So, and by the way, we're looking for volunteers to teach those classes. Hit me up if you're interested or know somebody who would be, but I just feel really like this is such a great example of how we can help people in a really meaningful, efficient way. So I'm really supportive of this.
I think it's exciting too that they are renovating a historical building in our community and doing it with energy efficiency, and there's a lot of great things
Yeah.
about it.
And I'd just like to shout out to our building department who, when they came in to talk about this, really, really worked for finding solutions and ones that reduced costs. The Helping Hands were really concerned about making sure that the fire safety was top notch. And Brian worked with them to find a solution that had the same coverage, but a lot less cost, which will help them get this open sooner. So it was very cool to see everybody working together. And when Alan came in, he brought with him one of his business partners who went through that financial literacy class and talked about how much it completely changed his life. It's nice to add that too.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So do we need a motion? to support the letter or?
Sure, why not?
Or anybody want to make a motion?
I move to support the submission of this letter or the signing and submission of this letter to in support of Helping Hands.
For a second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any other conversations or comments? Otherwise, if you're in favor, say aye.
I,
Aye. Anybody opposed? Great. Oh, you'll take care of that?
I will take care of the rest of that. Thank you so much.
Did we decide, did you need a vote on the support of the whole pack?
We're not, we're going to only vote on that once we have a fully written out agreement. Today was about getting everybody educated about it.
Perfect.
So the next item is the Maker Studios update.
Yes. And joining us today are Stephen Wade and Clayton Taylor from Maker Studios.
Hi, guys.
And they're here to provide an update on their project in Manzanita.
Cool.
Can we just, yeah, come on up.
No,
Yeah, come on up, come on up.
You got a spot for me?
I was gonna have you guys stand, but honestly, I'm just gonna move and let you guys sit right here together, if that's all right.
Sitting's better.
All right. Yeah,
Or something.
there you go. We got another
Enough.
chair.
He's got that. He's just gonna be here for emotional support.
Just gonna hang out, right, you guys, be here. Others.
Yeah, so Parker just wanted us to just kind of give you guys a quick update as to where we're at. I guess, first of all, thanks. We just got, or I guess we're getting today the grant money, so huge thanks for that. That really helps us a lot. Yeah, thanks for backing our project. We really appreciate it.
Good project.
Yeah, we think so. So I just jotted down some notes real quick. I'll just kind of blast through them and keep it quick. As far as funding goes, for our project, kind of broke this down into funding, construction, and leasing. Funding, so the money you guys just gave us, we're gonna put that to use immediately with our site engineer. We're working on the site, infrastructure, moving soil around, trying to get everything to fit just right. So that's great that we can get cranking on that. I'm working with Parker to go after this money through Colpack, the partnership. And he's been great with that. That's gonna help us basically put about 15% of our stack together, initial startup funding that we need. These are forgivable loans. One is with OFA and the other one is with DEQ.
It's fun, yeah.
And then I think on the back end of that, then there's another fund we're gonna apply for through you guys, construction funding. I think you said that's like 250 or something like that.
That's just the next round of our housing production.
The next rounding, yeah. All this money for us is critical to help our project pencil. Our, infrastructure site costs are coming in a bit higher than we anticipated. So, basically being able to raise this initial 15% of our project is roughly penciling at 10 million. So 1.5 in forgivable loans puts us in a position where we can then get our permanent financing in place, kind of carve that off the top, and make this pencil with a lender. Because, our rents are kind of capped at 100% AMI to get the tax 10-year abatement during the hold. So it's like a dance, right?
Sorry to interrupt, but does it have to be 100% or can it be up to 120?
I'll take that. So we have a tax abatement program and the requirement is that the rents need to average 100% AMI. And so that's so you're not incentivizing just maxing out at 120% every single unit.
So, yeah, we're assuming that we're modeling it based off of that right now, but if it doesn't work out, then we might shift towards a higher average up to 120. So it's still in the first category, but it's trying to figure out, what makes the most sense.
And there's a balance there too. Our program allows to have units excluded. So if you have 100 units and you wanted some of them to be market rate, then you could have enough affordability to average 100% AMI still And again, there's that balance between the tax and the revenue that the developers will have to do the calculus on.
Yeah, so like one building might go at 100% AMI kind of as a basis, and that kind of has its own path, and the other ones are like 120 or something, so. But from where we stand right now, it's trying to assume that they're all 100 AMI, and we track that until that breaks mathematically, then we figure something out, so.
Yeah, it's the debt to income ratio number that I have to be mindful of with banks. So they will put.
Because eventually, yeah, we go and share that with the bank, and the bank's like, okay, this makes sense, we'll refinance it for. the long
Yeah,
run.
up to, right now, 8.5 is kind of the tipping point for us. We can't really go beyond that. So to get traditional lenders to step up so we can pay out our private equity and pay for our land, and all that good stuff. So.
Hey, Steve, could you describe kind of like what the difference is if you're doing a traditional development and you go to a bank and you're looking for financing, like what they're expecting of you versus this project that you have going where you're doing this workforce housing? The equity they expect you to bring is a lot different, isn't it?
It is. Yeah, your equity stack you're gonna have a lot of participants, if you will, and you're gonna be paying different levels of return to different people, depending on risk. And then the bank is gonna be kicking in, call it anywhere up to 60 to 70% usually on that, and then you're gonna use them to do your permanent financing with this type of project because the AMIs are low. And the way this project cash flows, we can't really go that route. The banks won't. Well, the banks are not in a lending mood at all right now, and the interest rates are too high. So for us to do this, we got to take down roughly 15 to 20% in public funding and then source the other 70 to 80 from private, which we've started to have conversations with and pay a return to those folks that is somewhere in the 5 to 7% for a 12-month period. Right. So, you look at it as, just to simplify it, it's like $7 million. We have to add 500,000 to that because that's what we got to pay back to these folks. So it ends up being 7.5. So it's tough. It's tough to do these projects. I mean, it's like razor thin, our fee is small. And for us to get this phase one done is gonna put us in a better position to do the second phase of the project, which is exactly the same on the same site, same number of doors, but will be, have a little more meat on the bone for us. So this one is really about just proving the project, right? Getting everybody together, the partners, et cetera. So.
First one's the hardest.
It is, especially when you're doing like workforce housing and you're going after all this money that wasn't there 2 years ago, right? We're kind of flying the plane as we're building it.
You're flying in here and tell them.
Well, you guys are out in front of everyone else, really.
And I think, yeah, the commission leading the effort, but also when we encounter others along the way as we investigated the site and finding people that might lease. There's just so much good traction and interest in the mission of the project. So for us, that kind of keeps, it's provable. We just got to kind of put the pieces together. So it's kind of interesting how connected the project becomes to the community pretty fast. So.
And a great example of that is that one of our meetings later on is with the Neocon School District. Mm-hmm. And I know that we've talked a little bit about pre-leasing in here, but just to remind you that for a bank to finance a project like this, they basically want all of the units already leased before they start to get built.
Yeah. It's like 3 critical milestones for us. We have to pull down 15% of the financing first. That's the, OFA, the DEQ, you guys, all that. Second thing is we've got to permit site, get it 100% permitted. And third, we've got to pre-lease the first phase. We get those 3 things lined up, then the private equity money will be there or the traditional lenders. Then they feel really good about it. So, yeah.
100% pre-lease.
Yeah.
Wow. That's tough to do.
It's really difficult considering the
It is, but
demographic. I mean,
34 units. when you guys, I think your county needs 1,600 doors, right?
That was the last HNA.
So, I mean, this is just a tiny fraction. Well, I do have a thing about leasing in here, and I can just jump to that. So we've started to have meetings and talk to healthcare workers, entities in the Halem Bay Health District. Parker's connecting me to Providence. The school district we're sitting down with today. I've started to talk to local restaurants and groups in Manzanita about pre-leasing. I feel pretty confident we're gonna get this thing pre-leased here, actually quicker than later. I think we're gonna find the demand is there for a lot more. And obviously, we can only build so much on this site. We're gonna be limited, so.
And
That's like the least of my concerns, honestly, is pre-leasing.
Yeah. But then just to add one more thing that's kind of come up over the last few weeks in this discussion, when I've talked to Providence and Seaside, who still have a huge need for their healthcare workers. We talked about AMIs and how Clatsop County's AMI is about 20% higher than Tillamook County's. And, that doesn't stop at county lines. So that means that there is a premium discount for anybody in Seaside who wanted to pre-lease workforce level housing in Manzanita is going to be the best possible deal that they're gonna find anywhere. So there's a lot of excitement.
Yeah, they can just come down the road, tie up our product and.
It's interesting that the groups we've talked to, they like know that Halem Bay is like, we need like what, like 24, we need it now. Like they know their number, they don't necessarily know the mechanism of getting the housing happening. So we kind of become that. Like, well, we can deliver that. We're a 10-minute drive away within the radius of commute, right? So, so that's why we say there, it seems like it kind of ties together pretty well with demand so far. But, yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I feel pretty good about the pre-leasing part.
If you have pre-leasing of healthcare workers, you might be able to get Columbia Pacific CCO in if they're not.
It's something I'm intending to discuss on them, especially given their the recent discussion they had about their housing money and their directive to use it.
Yeah, because if you know you're pre-leasing to medical workforce, Columbia Pacific CCO, I'm guessing would come in with a grant, which would help get to that 15% much more rapidly.
I believe that's what they did when they did the Red Lion conversion up there as well.
They bought the whole thing.
They bought the whole thing. That's right.
They bought the whole thing. Bought the whole thing.
And, potentially, like with a group like Providence, if they've got money, there could be a partnership in phase 2 where they're part of our funding stack.
I think those conversations have been easier because receiving the grant and then a little bit of publication we've had locally that have kind of pushed the project out there and just told people, hey, there's housing coming. So we got approached by the Connie High,
Tyler Reed.
Yeah, he's like, I need housing. How do we make this happen? So again, that has not happened for us on other projects and other places we've worked. For people like reaching out clearly, so.
No, and I mean, to give the Housing Commission kudos, this is a housing conversation that's been happening in Tillamook County since 2015. The Housing Commission started, it was 2018, right? And the work that's been done to consistently push information out to our community about the need for housing and about, the opportunities that are coming up, so that the people they're looking for it. They know.
It's like all people need to do is like raise their hand or send you guys an email saying I need housing, and the system that Parker has put in play is kind of really paying off.
Yeah, and we'll be a little bit more, I guess, aggressive or vocal about the pre-leasing and going out to the community once we have a little more money in place, and we know that we are 100% going into the ground by the end of the year. Then it's like, game on.
Then you can really say, I can deliver housing at this time, plan on it, hire for it.
Another company, even though it's a longer commute, but I mean, I know they were busing people from Portland during COVID, is Tillamook Country Smoker. They really need housing.
Yeah, anyone you guys want to send to Parker and he can put a list together, I'm happy to sit down.
Yeah, today we're just short of a road show, I feel like. We're here until 6 tonight? We're here up and down.
We have 6 meetings, so this is just one after the other. We're talking to a leasing company after this.
I kind of want like a sign or like a be costing more like, need housing?
Inflatable.
Yeah.
I have one of those.
Yeah.
But yeah, do you have any questions?
I hope you don't give all the pre-leasing away to Clatsop County.
I'm sitting here fighting. this
Well,
But I'll let you know.
I've mentioned to Parker, like I have healthcare workers and teachers in my family, so my goal is to lease this thing up with healthcare and teachers. I feel like they need it more than anyone else.
One concern I have is the healthcare workforce income eligible? Because none of our nurses would be.
Meaning that they make too much. Well, this is the higher rate. It's not affordable.
This is not affordable.
So it should be.
So they fall, it's my understanding and my experience or research, they fall into they fall into the missing middle category where they make too much for affordable, but they don't make enough for like market rate.
So they should be anywhere between up to 120 AMI basically should be the.
I've done the math on that in the past and it didn't pencil out and nurses make minimum $50 an hour. But maybe
Every single one of the Nahalem Bay Health District workers.
that one does not surprise me. It's the Providence RNs that would surprise me, but they must have other staff they need housing for, or maybe
No, that might be
well, and Oregon just raised the minimum.
Well, and it's
for nurses, so it's not looking good for that to line up in the future, but we'll see.
And the AMI did just raise this month too.
That's true.
And it'll probably tick up another 5% next year. At least so. But we're keeping our underwriting numbers where they're at. That way we have, as those go up, we have this like cushion, if you will, room to go up if we need to. But if we don't, then we're hitting that 100% where we can get the tax break while we hold this and hold phase 2 as well. So, I don't exactly know what the tax bill would be on that. Do you have any idea? And we've never talked about that.
I wouldn't even try and tell you if I could, because I'm
Get out the calculator.
legal or financial advice. So.
Yeah, I don't know. No idea.
We can talk to the assessor though, if you'd like to kind of.
Yeah, it might be something that we could just back of the napkin, just kind of get a ballpark.
Yeah.
Just so we know.
Carrie was here, I'm sure she'd be able to give some sort of very non-committal number.
Yeah, and that's fine. I mean, it's a process, right? Construction, we've more or less identified the GC we're gonna work with on this project, who has experience building out here on the coast and has also done workforce and affordable housing. So we think it might be a really good fit. I mean, Clay is gonna talk to some other groups, but we had a really great meeting with them and they looked at our project pretty closely and I think it would be a great fit. So what else? I mean, you continue to refine the project and you're about to engage with our engineers and start the next level of dialing all that in. We're hopeful that the money that Manzanita just received, the 2.7 million for their, I guess it's their water pump station or something along those lines.
They received that as part of 1537, I believe.
And they're gonna be putting it won't be pump stations depends on.
It's
city
something
council.
about something that delivers.
It's gonna be pushing out the main water up to near where you guys. would serve.
So because our site and the site above us for the Home First, we don't have water sewer. So I know our partners are talking to them about allocating some of that to our site, funding to pay for that because that would be cost prohibitive for us to have to write a check to bring water and sewer out to our site. I mean, that wouldn't be good. So we'll see how that goes. If anybody has any sway there.
That might be something CPCCO housing funds could help support.
Let's explore that.
Because there's multiple projects that we by housing.
Is there any TIP funding available for infrastructure on workforce or affordable?
I will look into it. I'm not aware.
Yeah. You would think there might be something out there for that. I thought Nathan might have mentioned something, Nathan Wildfire.
Yeah,
he was here.
He did say that he's gone after that before.
Yeah. not with your county, but I guess it's his job to kind of tee that up. So,
But in general, the infrastructure thing is something that it's not just specific to our project, the adjacent affordable project and the city is also working on. So that's kind of another bubble of like, what piece of that are we kind of sharing or responsible for in terms of cost? We're trying to figure that out, so.
because the site, I mean, it's beautiful, and I don't know if anyone has been out there to see it, but I mean, it's in the highlands, so, you know, it's out of the floodplain, it's, tsunami zone, all that good stuff. But there is land we're gonna have to move around, and, you know, there's no roads, there's no sidewalks, fire hydrants, street lights, all that stuff is so expensive, so trying to find ways to offset that is huge to us, especially water and sewer. So normally this stuff is like right at the curb. You're just pulling it to the site. It's not that big a deal, but
So did your $10 million budget, did that include any water, sewer?
we have yeah.
It's part of it, but we don't know if, are we gonna be paying for all of it or?
Our ceiling for site improvements, which is inclusive of everything I just mentioned, is 1 million. We can't exceed that. That is our limit. And 1 million's a lot for that, you know, but we also, because the city requires 2 parking spaces per door. It's a lot of parking we have to put in. So we're hoping we can work with them to change that, and reduce it down to 1.5. Because our land partner, Jim, built this coastal, what is it? What is that?
Classic Street Cottage.
Classic Street Cottages, where he got the parking reduced down to 1.5 per door. And those pencil out square footage wise, basically identical to ours. So it's the same thing.
So the strategy right now with that is that we're carrying the cost of all the stuff that we know, right? And that 10 million is like our cap, you know? We need to bring that down and we need to work to bring that down. So that either through grants or through sharing infrastructure costs with another project, or if we can get the parking ratio reduced, that'll save us, you know, $150,000 probably in some parking spaces we don't need. So we're trying to deal with it in a few different ways, but we know what the goal is, you know?
And then one other thing too, Manzanita's, I believe, is it this week? Or is it next week? They're gonna vote or start discussing changing the height limit at the site to 3 stories. So if we can, so that would mean instead of us building 3 buildings to get to 34 doors, we would build 2 buildings to get to 34 doors.
Save us also.
Which save us a decent amount of money on that. So, and would also give us the opportunity to perhaps put more units on the site going forward if the demand is there, you know, if whoever steps forward and is like, we need 50 doors and we'll pre-lease it or whatever, then it's like, great, let's do it. So
Curious, Mark, if you have any insight as to where the city council is on that. The amount of stories.
They just talked about that at either a council meeting or
yeah,
something.
the one that happened was when was that one? That was about a month ago, right?
That was the planning committee meeting.
Yeah, we were on that call.
Yeah.
And height is an issue. Anything above 28.5 feet.
And I think we're just trying to, and I know Home First, the affordable project that we share the site with, that's critical for them.
Yeah.
To get to, I think it's 32 feet. So it's not a huge bump. I mean, we're talking 4 feet here, and that helps us and them pencil our projects better so we can actually get these over the line.
I think with the zoning change, which the planning commission, okay, the city council has not yet. It was an annexation issue,
Yeah.
so Manzanita it's recommended will annex this property and rezone it I can't remember what it is, hotel.
Yeah,
Right.
the higher density level.
But then there's a concern that
It's
no
gonna
one
be,
wants to have a precedent set. No one,
I think it would,
some people.
In a beach town with limited oceanfront property, it is a huge concern as far as
It would be-
precedent goes.
deed restricted just to this
Okay,
site.
that was what I was wondering.
And lead to this particular
Well,
project because it's providing housing.
And to remind you all, this property is already deed restricted. Jim and Rick have gone and restricted it for affordable and workforce housing only now and forever.
Tied to these AMI limits, so
Yes.
no, this is the place to do it.
Which,
So given all that, should we consider putting forward a letter of recommendation or support for that height variance for the council's consideration? Because I think this is pretty important.
Right. It may be preliminary because they haven't even decided to annex it.
Oh,
they've got.
It's the planning commission. Right.
okay.
I assume they will, but.
But
So
this
there's
may be a time to start.
so there's no talk in the media of the actual buildings will be what drives. So it depends on process, I guess.
Well,
It can't hurt, I guess.
our project, I mean, we designed and underwritten our project as a 2-story project with 2 parking spots per unit. That's not ideal for us because that basically puts us in a position where we're just pushing the ceiling, like we just don't have any
Well,
money.
it comes down to like, maybe we don't need to get no need to be as successful with the grants that we have outlined for ourselves, right? So it's that balance point of if we can solve costs in one way by 2 buildings rather than 3, or save infrastructure in one way, or reduce parking, that will bring down our cost to build, which could kind of help us reduce our gap on the amount of money we're chasing for the.
Yeah.
But right now, it's all laid out as though we're doing all of that as currently understood within the code. That was the plan, was build the project for today, and if it evolves, it'll get better, but make it work today.
Well, that changing of the height restriction, I mean, you said that Tillamook County needs 1,600 doors. I mean, by 2-story buildings versus 3-story buildings, that's gonna get you to the goal faster.
For sure, but it's also in a coastal community with views.
Yeah.
It's probably the hottest issue.
Absolutely.
So my worry is to tie housing demand to someone's very visceral, like, oh, there's a 3-story building next to me and I can't see the ocean. I feel like that you get in that zone of like, you gotta get community support through this process,
that-
so.
But
Property restrict view, like, or.
No.
Because that's what I was remembering. It's like back and it's in.
It's like I want to have a bus trip. We all go out there and walk the property and you guys all get eyes on it.
Those, it's literally.
But that's why this has been going really well, is they first did the deed restriction to confirm it's just for housing on this part, and then the annex. So they're really identifying where this is before there's a code change. So that way, and again, this is all very like a lot of folks talking and working through it. Trying to say these are the right ways to get this to work, so that way it doesn't turn into something that isn't.
Right, it doesn't turn into something that's close to the ocean or close to a river that.
What we don't want to have is
Yeah.
vacuum impact with housing delivery. Like it should be.
Absolutely.
And it makes sense and it fits in and all that stuff. So.
I mean, the site, if you've seen it, or if you haven't seen it, it's basically like a par 5 hole, like fairway. It's just like a big, long dog leg at the very end of this whole like property, surrounded by trees on both sides. You can't really see it from the road, and none of the homeowners or anyone can see it looking east. It's hidden, and another 3 or 4 feet isn't going to make any difference. People aren't going to see these buildings. I don't think they would see them if they were 4 stories, quite honestly, because of the trees. So it's not gonna.
So, great job to keep us moving. I so appreciate you guys coming.
Any other questions?
Getting feedback about something that we, supported in the fall is pretty important.
My only request is that at some point today on your roadshow, Parker gets a photo of the 3 of you together that we can use.
Oh, they're getting the whole interview thing. I'm interviewing them at the site. They're gonna talk about it.
Going to the.
Take pictures.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, great.
Meetings out
I
there.
grabbed some folks that I want.
In fact, any developer who comes through my office is now required to do a short social media interview with me. It's the cost of doing business.
The only thing I would suggest is if it's possible to do the actual interview outside of the wind.
Okay.
To reduce the
Yeah.
noise
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
background, because that was a little bit of a challenge with,
Danny.
Danny.
I would say the promotion that you guys of this stuff is super, super critical to us. We're more than happy to help with any of that, because that's how we've been getting
Yeah.
the school district saying, hey, I heard about you guys. So,
Just more eyes on the project.
yeah.
I think it's a good idea to share some of these government incentives between ourselves and the developers and kind of get some cross communication going there. I've learned a lot, for example, from Nate at the Seagulls Rest. And so it's, like anything you come up with, I'd like to share with you and vice versa.
Totally. I mean, Parker's been amazing and I feel like, we're chasing all available funding that there is currently on the plate. I just uploaded our project with the new Orca system through OHCS. So they're reviewing it now. I'm going to hear in a couple of weeks. I don't know if we qualify for this cycle of funding because it's workforce housing. It's not affordable, but this would put us at the front of the line for workforce in the next year. And I've already got a rep or a tech that I'm talking to there. So I've kind of pushed that as far as I can without being annoying. So
they're super annoyed with me.
They know you.
it's, I get, that's just like, my frustration, I think, in general with all this is there's such a need for this and we all need to move quickly.
Yeah.
But some of the folks I come across or whatever, just snail's pace, right? It's like, we all gotta like get together.
And they're square and they're stone and we're pushing them uphill. That's what I say about them all the time back in.
Feels like it. So,
But thank you guys again.
yeah, totally. Do you have a giant check for us?
No, I get the giant double check. They,
It's kind of hoping.
the surveyors won't let me use their, they won't let me use their printer.
We have them printed for, I just that big one.
You do have one?
We have them printed for Rotary,
Next,
so
yeah,
like,
next fucking cycle, everybody's getting a double check and picture.
It's a great.
Do you want your seat back?
I do.
Good to see you.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
We'll be hitting the road in just a minute.
You bet.
So in regards to some of the obstacles that the developers are hitting, would it be, I recommend that we should put it on our next round of funding. That when the developers come to us, they've been through a pre-app with the planning department, so they know what obstacles they're gonna run up against. And then we can hit those at the time they're asking for the money, showing us what obstacles they're running up against. So we can write letters of support to the planning commission for, if they get it.
That's a great.
So it's not happening after the fact, and then here they have this money that they can't use because say they decide to deny that annexation, then there they are.
Yeah.
And they have to implement that clause.
And I think just while we're still on the discussion of challenges that developers are facing, I wanted to share a little bit of news from one of the projects we sponsored. Danny McGinley, the T-Mobile building, is considering declining the allocation that he received just because he is not finding the finance sources that he needs. But one thing that came from that conversation, I didn't think it'd be so hard to get this out of a developer, but it's like pulling teeth. It's like, well, what exactly do you need? Like what is it that you realistically, I could deliver that would get your project going? And he said, I need $1.2 million at 4.5%. So
For a what?
he needs a loan of $1.2 million at 4.5%.
Okay.
Is what it would take for that building to resume construction towards those 4 units that he described. I will keep you guys posted. He's considering he wants to be more active in Tillamook County, and until he can find the financing for that building, he's considering putting a card table in there and making it his office while he does work down here. So he's pretty committed to getting work done, but just, it's good for you guys to be aware what exactly he needs. And just so you can think about that. I don't want to take any more time away from Dave, who has very graciously agreed to elevate all of our understanding about housing tax credits.
Okay, I'll try to elevate it anyway. Can you all see this board? Was it put in a different place?
Yep.
Okay. So as I see it, the role of the finance committee is to help us find sources of capital at what might be affordable rates to make unaffordable housing affordable. And so we kind of scan the horizon, looking at the capital markets and the state and federal and loan and grant programs. So I'm trying to find ways to reduce the cost of capital. And as I see it, the development committee then is on the other side of that, trying to find ways to reduce the cost of construction. And hopefully we can marry the two and come up with some more affordable housing in that regard. So with regard to reducing the housing costs, I want to kind of talk about this, the cost of capital. I want to talk about what is the cost of capital. And basically, you often hear that it's referred to as the capital stack. And with regard to residential housing, the capital stack is primarily composed of just two elements, debt and equity. And so if you assume that we want to try to find capital to acquire or build a $350,000 housing unit, and in today's world, what we're learning is that the equity portion needs to be at least 35% of that cost, and the debt portion is 65% of that cost. And all capital comes at a cost. With regard to debt, of course, we know what the cost is there. We all have home mortgages and know that we make monthly payments of principal and interest to the lenders. On the equity side, in order to entice investors or developers or sponsors to participate with us, we've got to give them some return as well. And so at least in the past, that's been at least 6% return. So this capital all comes at a cost. I'd like to just run through a couple of quick acronyms for you here. OHCS, I'll refer to that. That's the Oregon Housing and Community Services. And they're pretty good. I think a pretty good sized bureaucracy in Salem. They're a clearinghouse for a lot of these funding opportunities. There's also NOAA, which is the Network for Affordable Housing. And they basically are helping us with some of these programs as well. And I'd like to talk to you today about the Agricultural Workers Housing Tax Credit and the Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit. And those are both ways that will help us reduce the cost of capital. And so what is a tax credit? And I guess we need to spend just a minute of time talking about that. Traditionally, the best way to save income taxes is to get married and have a lot of kids, and perhaps make contributions to political campaigns. In addition to that, we're also looking for deductions and credits. So what's the difference between a deduction and a credit? Basically, for a family in Oregon, a $1 deduction will save them 33 cents in income taxes. That's federal and state income taxes. Whereas with regard to a credit, a $1 tax credit will save $1 in tax savings. So there's the credits are worth 3 times as much as the deduction. So we're always looking for credits. Okay. So basically, with regard to the Agricultural Workers Housing Tax Credit, that's a remarkable credit. It just blew my mind when I started researching this and understanding it better. And basically what it says is that it will, the state will give us a 50% credit for all eligible costs in acquiring or constructing a housing unit. 50% credit for the eligible costs. So what are the eligible costs? Well, basically, it's everything other than the bare land portion. So we might assume in our $350,000 housing unit here, we might allocate 20% of that to bare land. It's in the ballpark, I think, anyway, and then 80% to the structure and the land improvements, excavation, sidewalks, all construction costs, including appliances, and it's an all-in kind of a thing. So if we had $280,000 of qualifying costs in this $350,000 housing unit, a 50% credit would equal $140,000. $140,000 credit is our taxes. Now that credit is available to us over a 5-year period, a minimum, and over a maximum 10-year period. So you could take 20% a year for 5 years. But if you can't use it all yourself, or if you can't use some of it yourself, you can sell those credits. And in the state language, we call that a transfer. We're going to transfer these credits in exchange for cash. And right now, there's a pretty ready market for those credits at about 80% of face value. So the interesting thing is that if we were able to generate $140,000 in credits through the Ag Workers Program, and then we sold them for 80% of their face value, that would generate $112,000, which is kind of what we need for our 35% equity. So man, when I saw that, I thought, wow, that's a great way to reduce these equity costs. Basically, send the equity back to the investors. Right? In addition, then we've got this Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit. And that interestingly is a credit that doesn't go to the developer, but instead it goes to the lender. So if the lender will make a loan that is at least up to 4 points under the interest rate, they can get a credit as well. And I understand Noah is the folks that kind of broker a lot of these, and there's an appetite for those as well. And so it's possible that through an Oregon Affordable Housing Tax Credit, we might go from a 7.5% interest rate. We might reduce that by 4 points down to 3.5%. And I was really getting excited. So with a 4-point reduction, we might go from a 7.5% to a 3.5% rate. And on a mortgage, what would we decide, $230,000 mortgage, we'd be going from a $1,700 a month payment to a $1,300 a month payment. Now, in that particular program, that $400 savings has to be passed through to the tenants, which is kind of interesting. But what that does then is it makes it opens up some other funding sources, if you can reduce the amount of monthly rent. So, well, this has really come together. And so I had some great ideas about how we might structure both of these programs to facilitate some housing in Tillamook County. I had some ideas with regard to a farm employer, for example, might buy a residence in Tillamook County and offer it to their staff, their key employees, to say, hey, if you stay with me for 10 years, basically I'll sell you this house for the outstanding mortgage at the end of the 10-year period, and the employer would be out nothing. So this is really getting good until yesterday afternoon. Yesterday afternoon, and I've had several conversations with the folks at OHCS. They're very helpful folks, but I didn't learn until yesterday, with the help of Nate Palmer, who's also investigating this for Seagull's Rest, that this credit is subject to staff discretion. The amount of the credit is subject to staff discretion. So I thought, what's that?
Bring them cookies.
Sorry?
Bring them cookies.
So would an example of that be the milk truck drivers? Without them, there's no Tillamook cheese.
Okay,
But they're
good
truck
point.
drivers,
Yeah.
and that's like in the gray area.
What is an agricultural worker?
Sure, sure. We should talk about that. So it's not only agriculture, it's also aquaculture. Because we have both in the county. It is basically harvesting and processing those products. Really all the way up through packaging, but does not include delivery for wholesale or retail purposes. So for example, folks at the creamery would qualify as long as they're involved in the processing. At the smokers would apply. Of course, any farmers, employees would qualify. Hay truck drivers do not qualify. It's interesting that reforestation workers do qualify, but timber harvesters don't. I don't quite understand that logic, but.
So then
Could
with
it
the
be argued though that the milk is required for the production of the cheese and therefore it is part of
Oh, I'm
production?
sorry. I thought you were talking about the distribution of the bottled milk. You're
No,
talking about the raw
no,
milk.
the tanker.
Yeah,
Thanks for milk, yeah.
Because Wald is the one that says we want to build employee housing.
Okay.
And that would be like really low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And they actually have land, I believe, that they've identified for building employee housing.
Okay. So this ag worker credit has got 2 parts to it. One part is for on-farm housing. The other part is for community-based housing. And the on-farm housing portion is a lot simpler. The community-based housing is much more complicated. You've got to go through ORCA and you've got to be a certified developer, et cetera, et cetera. So on-farm is really kind of the sweet spot. Yeah.
So we go back to the staff discretion.
Yeah.
Scott.
Right, that looks like a giant ball.
We got distracted, but
Well,
what does that mean?
we started with 50%, Dave, and where does staff discretion generally?
That's the
land?
dilemma. That's the dilemma. So when I heard that, what? So I read the enabling legislation, the state statutes, couldn't find anything in there about staff discretion. Went to the OARs, the regulations, to see what, is anything there? No. The Oregon Department of Revenue puts out a publication 17, which is kind of the Bible for those folks who prepare Oregon income tax returns. They've got 2 pages describing this credit and nowhere does it say anything other than it's a 50% credit. So I don't really know where this is coming from, but the folks at OHCS said yesterday, it's unusual that we ever go to 50%. However, they did want to say that they're giving waivers to projects that don't employ ag workers. Which I thought was interesting. So for the makers guys that may work in Manzanita, you got a preference to ag workers, but it's not a protected class. So, and we've seen some other examples around that in this. So what do we do with this? Boy, we were excited about this. I was excited about this whole concept. We talked about renting this room or booking this room and inviting the farmers and the public to come. There was an OHCS guy who was willing to come down and tell us all about it. It was great. But now with this, I'm not sure what to do with it.
What are they saying the average is of of the current, staff discretionary?
I'm not sure maybe the average, but it could be anywhere from 5 to 30%.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
Why would they even want to limit?
Well,
the
it's
allowable
too good a deal. And the state's got a limited amount of credits that they can.
I was saying, it's the limited amount of credits, right, that drives it. There's, so I know just the affordable housing tax credits, that Oregon has been out of them. So that's why affordable housing developments have been put off, because they don't have any more, and it takes an act of the federal government to allow more tax credits, right? Because these are federal,
That's this credit.
right?
Yes.
So that's that one,
And they're expecting that to be available next year again,
right, with any luck.
with any luck.
So the agricultural worker doesn't have a limited amount? Or they just haven't hit the end of it
They
yet?
haven't capped it yet. They haven't.
Then
yet.
it capped or
They
they
haven't
haven't reached
hit
it?
I don't think they've hit the end of it.
They
is
haven't
my
hit the end of
understanding.
it, but that's why they try to spread it as far as they can. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I would also like to add that I think part of it is that there are other farm worker housing programs through the USDA and other sources. And I have to imagine that they probably look at how many other buckets you are drawing from when they make their determination of what percentage of credit. So I will be attending the farm housing workshop with USDA next week. They've just been funded considerably through the executive branch announced that they were adding a lot of funding for farm worker housing. So the USDA coffers have just gotten filled up. And so I will be coming back to you guys with an explanation of my understanding of how to get that funding as well.
We've talked about this before, but I think it's really important that everybody remembers that the on-farm housing can only be used for farm labor. And so the value of the construction of that home can never be realized in the same sense of equity of other home construction. So this is a really important program where we would have no farm worker housing because, or it's substandard because you're not going to ever really see a return on it. So just want to point that out.
And I'd also point out that Oregon land use would say, if you put in an employee farm housing and then it is not occupied, or you do not have the farm employees to fill it, the house is to be removed.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's land use there that also can make it difficult to realize that valuation, because if they become unoccupied, or you're asking for more farm housing and you cannot demonstrate that you actually have the need for the employee housing, you're not gonna get more housing, right? So there's that coupled in, that land use also makes a hardship as well.
Right, because we're separating our urban from.
The rural, I mean, it's not, because the other part of this is farm housing is not intended to, sorry, I'm totally inserting land use here. Farm housing is not intended to address the housing needs issue. It's meant to address the farm use. It's meant to address the farm needs. So it is not intended, it is not built to address the housing needs issue. It definitely could help, especially in communities where we have farm use as a predominant production and industry, but it is not the solution.
That's why we've been looking at our unincorporated areas and all the cities and.
Yeah.
That's what.
They're the areas reserved for that density.
So a mobile home might be a good application, one you,
They traditionally are required to be mobile or manufactured homes. The only time you get a stick-built farm employee housing is if it is on the exact same lot as the primary home for the producer of the farm. So most farmers in this community generally stick with the mobile and manufactured because of the concern that could happen if they would have to lose that component, because who wants to build a stick-built home and then have to tear it down?
So where are we at here? Because we got like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
so what do we do given this new, for me, a new development? What do we do in terms of getting this out to the public and specifically the farm employers? And I guess what's coming to me is that maybe what we do is we find out which of those folks are interested in providing employee housing. And then we get a sense as to the cost of that housing and the employees' salaries or wages. And then we start trying to get it to fit into this or into the new USDA program. So perhaps that's the way to go about this, is instead of telling them what they can do for sure, say, if you've got a need for employee housing, let us know and see if we can't find a way to make it all fit together.
Yeah, trying to make those connections seems to be the missing point here. Developers come to me and ask for help, farmers do not. So I'm trying to get that connection.
What I think Swald is a perfect example.
Yeah. And then as far as the creamery goes, they have really good communications to the farmer owners, and we could get into that pipeline of communication and maybe set up a Q&A or.
I think the next step is for me and Dave to take all of the agricultural housing incentives, credits, programs, and build the toolkit so that when we go, we know, here's option A, B, C, and D, and it sounds like 1, 3, and 5 apply to you. Or whatever the situation may be. I think is the next step is to build that toolkit and make sure that we really understand it.
That would be a good one too. Let's make sure we really know before we start putting it out there. Otherwise, we can certainly lead to confusion in the community and a little bit and distrust, I think.
Right.
And I think tax credit's a big word, especially in farming.
Well, and what I told Dave when this first came up is very few farmers make enough money to take advantage of the tax credit, even with it broken down over 5 years. And so the understanding of the ability to transfer those and have somebody else. And I don't know what's the market. That's probably more than we have the 5 minutes for, but I'd like at some point to understand what the market for those transfers is, where that happens, because I'm not sure that the average farmer is like gonna understand or know what those steps would be to take advantage of it.
And maybe the best way we could help support
Farmers,
this.
I'm married to one who does get it.
Well, and maybe the best way we could support this is finding those resources to help farmers take advantage of this.
Well, for somebody that's done this before, I mean, I think that one thing that works really nice in this community is when somebody's done something that's been successful, being able to replicate that or tell the story of that, like, hey, this worked for us, and being able to kind of show that through, like, this is a real life person that lives in this community that's had success with it.
So if you could buy these credits at 80%.
Who buys them and how, who
Good
does
deal.
that?
So people buy
It's
them.
not at all hard to do, to find buyers.
Yes, it's an investment when you have a huge tax liability for a year. You as a business or an individual can go out and buy these tax credits and reduce your liability.
Okay.
And yeah,
Is there like a-
it's a thin margin, but it's worth it.
So the ag worker credit, I think, expires at the end of 2025. So our time is limited. In the meantime, I think if you hear of a farm type program, an employer that needs employee housing, and particularly if they're willing to put it on their own land, let's get started with that right away and start giving them information.
Could we,
Go ahead.
could we do a pilot project with this involved company?
Possibly.
Would you take a picture of that and send it to us, or even put it in the folder out there? I think that was a good, primer. I understand it more than I did when.
We need more of these,
Yeah.
Tutorials.
Kind of questions I have. Is there any limit to the amount of housing that can go onto a property?
On a farm?
Yeah.
Farm help housing, there's technically not a density limitation. It is presented by the need. So when an applicant proposes they want to put another farm help house, they have to demonstrate that they have the need for an additional house. It's pretty generic and simple. There's not a huge margin by which we need that demonstration done, but generally it's making sure the list of all the homes that the farm currently owns and if they are currently occupied. Because then if they have a farm help house that they're saying is not occupied and they want to put a new one, we're gonna go, why? You can fill the other one that you currently have. But other than meeting setback requirements, you know, and distances between structures, there's not an actual written, you can only have this many farm help houses on a farm. It's
And so one farm could basically hold 20 houses, but they could
Absolutely.
provide housing for 4 different farms, is that okay?
You cannot create housing for other firms. It would be a presentation of the producer because
Okay, sure.
part of it is they have to demonstrate that they're working for the primary farm producer. And it would be the primary farm producer's need that would generate the housing, so.
Okay, so
Thanks,
we're
guys.
the committee updates.
Fortunately, those are very few.
Yeah, well, Michelle, you're up first.
Well, mine will be short because we didn't have a meeting, but we did start pushing out our social media posts. And I am excited to share that we have a total of 302 followers. And our most recent posts were really, well, we have a reach of over 1,600 and engagement of close to 60, which are really good numbers. And this was not boosted, so this is organic.
Nice.
And it is largely due both to the fact that it's interesting content that I think people are hungry for, but also Kristen is helping facilitate sharing these out on the community pages. So please watch or follow, like, share those posts that are coming out, and I'm sharing them out within Tillamook
What's the
County.
handle on that?
Tillamook County Housing Commission.
Got that, they got 303 for the day.
Thank you. Yeah, that's all I have. I know we've got other things. This was a topic of discussion that we'll be looking at for targeted outreach. Anybody else from the committee have anything?
So I forwarded you something that was in a campaign ad that offended me. It was just one perception of the grants that we're giving away. And so we just need to keep a positive spin on what we are doing in this committee.
And so it was in the Bruce Loveland ad citing several slightly misleading statements, and one of them was pertaining to the funding that we allocate for the Housing Production Solutions Fund. My suggestion was that we just not address that directly, but that we just take the opportunity to present a factual statement on our social media feed about that. So if people are curious, they can go and see the truth.
That's why continuing to pass them on and to share them is a good thing. The information, factual information. So Dave, are you gonna tell us about the finance committee? No, we didn't have a meeting either, but you've been doing a lot of work. Yeah.
Basically, just continue to put tools in our toolbox.
And Parker, you have 2 committee updates.
Yeah, legislative did not meet. We are meeting quarterly now. Our next meeting will be in June at a time to be determined because our scheduled meeting falls on Juneteenth. And the development committee met yesterday. Greg, you're here. Would you want to have anything come out of that meeting that you want to share? Decided I don't have to say it all.
That caught me off guard.
Yeah, so-
I don't have anything prepared.
No, we didn't do a lot of prepare. We just kind of went over the things that we.
It was a short meeting. Parker was under the weather and he managed to come anyway.
Yep, we decided to went over the things that are going on, kept updates going, but made no new decisions.
No new business. So.
Thanks. Now we have time for public comment at the end here. No. Online, Briar, are you still with us?
Hopefully.
All right.
I think we are.
I am still
adjourned.
with you. Sorry, that was a struggle. That me and teams were not friends, but no, I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Okay, so we'll see you next month, June, do you know the date? June, the first Thursday of the month, 9 AM here,
I move to close the meeting.
right on.
June 6th.
Thanks, Parker.
Thank you. And thank you all.
Hey, Parker, I will not be here next. Yeah. Okay.